Alright, so in this part of the video we're going to talk about texturing. So I'll talk about how I textured the hair cards, the clothing, the body, and anything else after that. So right now I'm just creating my textures with XGen. So I'm creating individual planes per each different clump of hair, and I'm just going to make an XGen description that's placing and shaping the guides manually for each plane that I have made here. And I kind of tilted them slightly downwards so that we're getting a nice like fade off for the root texture. So I want to have like not just a subtle, like a straight ending, I want to have like more of a subtle transition of the hair. So here I'm just setting up my texture to be 4K. So when I render this with Arnold, it will give me just a straight 4K texture. And you can really line this up however you want. I choose to do it it's going from the top down, but you can go from the bottom up. This is just going to be wherever you lay your cards out. So here I'm just going to groom one of the panels, and I'll copy and paste all of the hair attributes to the other XGen descriptions. So here I'm just shaping the hair to fall downwards, making sure everything lines up properly. And I'm just rebuilding the curve so I get enough edges to shape the hair in a right way. So adjusting the width of the hairs to be accurate, and then tapering them off a little bit. I'm also probably going to paint a little bit of a density, so at least I don't get such a heavy, I get a little bit of inconsistency to the way that the hair grows. So here I'm just adding modifiers, which is what I will copy and paste to all the other ones to make sure that all of my hair clumps have the same properties. So the modifier count allows for, it's basically just saying like however many vertices are actually along the generated primitive for the hair. So if you're trying to add noise, you'll probably need to up the count for that. So clumping is just telling it how to clump, whether I'm clumping it to the guides or I'm clumping it to its own generated guides. Just adjusting length and everything. So here's just a lot of fine tuning and getting your properties right for whatever hair type you're going for. And then this is the hard part, and once you get this all done, then you can save it as a preset and load it in onto the other cards and just arrange the new clumps for however much hair you want. So this is the density mask I was talking about I was going to make. So here I'm just going to draw like little dots over where the guides are generating, so that here we get like a decent gap of generation. So we have like maybe some spots that aren't having hair, like it's a little bit missing. So this makes it feel a little more varied. Right, so I'm just assigning the AI standard surface, and I'll assign just a blonde color or blonde texture, and I'm going to change the color to pink because that's our hair color. So I'm changing that into the diffuse color because I'm simulating more of a dyed hair, which is what diffuse will give us. And because I'm trying to make it a stylized look, I'm also adding some pink into the specular and a little bit of orange into the specular as well, like the secondary specular. So here's the final shading of the hair, and then this is where I've copied the preset over to the other rectangles and kind of rearranged it in a new kind of way. And from these diffuse textures, I can also generate like normal maps, ambient occlusion, and a lot of other maps for the hairs. This is why I use XGen for the hair, because it's super useful for generating other maps. So the next thing I want to talk about is my process for texturing the clothing. So because this character I separated into 2 separate scenes, one where I textured the clothing and one in Substance Painter where I textured the body. This being so because I have so many texture sets for this character to be able to split it into content packs for Reallusion that I needed to basically separate it. I was worried that all the maps wouldn't fit into a Substance Painter scene. So usually you can put clothes in with the body, but in this case I didn't. So before you were seeing me separating my model into the separate materials per texture set and naming them all the proper material. And now I'm just setting up my clothing project with all the settings there. So now that everything is done here, I did all my normal baking from my high poly to my low poly with Marmoset. So I'm just going to drag and drop all of these in here. It's going to take a little while, so I'll probably just speed through that a little bit. And we'll skip to the very end. So the amount of maps I had is why I was kind of worried it wouldn't fit all into one scene. I've had times when I've imported too many texture sets before, oops, and my Substance Painter scene just saves but never opens again, so I have a little bit of fear with that. So this is why I separated it. And then I didn't really need anything depending on the body, so I separated based on the clothes. I kind of had a lot of shared materials, so texturing all the clothes together made sense. So starting my textures, I'm just starting to block in all of my base materials, and I'm going to do it as non-destructively as possible. So I'm bringing in the base material, I'm adjusting the color, I'm figuring out the colors for everything, so I get a base overview, and then I'm going to go into detailing everything. So for this, I'm using the color selection on my, as a mask in a group with the material inside that group. So this is saying that for all the gold trim, this whole group is going to contain my gold material. And then if I want to add any weathering on top of that, I can also put it inside this folder, and it's only going to apply to the gold trim. And then what this allows me to do afterwards is apply another let's say an overall dirt over top of every single one of those folders. So if it's the gold, the leather of my corset and all that stuff, then it'll apply to everything. So this allows me to have a lot of separation by sorting non-destructively by folders. And I baked out ID maps so that I could use the color ID selection for masks. So this is what I'm doing here. For the belt, I think I didn't bake out a proper ID map, so it didn't really work out the way I wanted, so I think I had to do a lot of by hand selection. Yeah, and same with these ones. I didn't plan for the interior here, so I didn't bake an ID for that. So I'm just going to select all the polys by hand and mask those out individually by using a paint. So this is the other way you can mask things. It's not like that you only need a color ID to mask things, but this is how I went about it. So after I start build, so this is my process for building the base materials. So I'll just go through and do the same for the shirt. So I'm going to assign another base material with folders and masking. Kind of want the shirt to be a little soft, but also, you know, the folds we have in here are also a bit harsh, so I'm trying to find something that looks a bit heavy, feels a little bit heavier, like kind of like a canvas. And then I'm just going to change the color of the shirt to a white color, or something like maybe a little just off-white. Yeah, it's a little like an eggshell white. I don't want something perfectly white because then it feels a little unnatural. There's always a little bit of tan tint to this canvas. So here I'm just going to lay in a base for the leather corset. I will add more detail to the leather, I think, a little bit later, but for now I just want something that resembles the proper colors, just something to give me a good idea of where I'm going. So this is a stylized leather that I'm using. It looks pretty good. It's not quite feeling leathery enough for me, so I'll probably add a lot more bump to this later, but in terms of colors, I feel like it feels right. So after all the base colors are blocked in, we're going to move on to detailing some more stuff. So everything is worked as non-destructive as possible, so I can go in and layer by piece more and more detail. So I'm going to start with the flowers, where I just blocked in a base pink, but now I'm going to start painting some more details in here, probably starting with like a dotted brush or something kind of spray painty, and I'm going to just layer in some orange, some darker purples, maybe a little bit of white on the edges and stuff. I think when you're hand painting is the only time you obviously can't work as non-destructive as possible. So that's a bit of a challenge. So I just kind of try to layer that in and do that as minimal as possible. Hand painting is usually the last thing I do. Right, so I'm just gonna punch in some of these like eyelets to hold the laces on. I just wanted to add a little bit more detail. I didn't model it in, but I thought that I might try to add it here and see if it gave it a little something. And it did give it a little something. So I'm just using a normal map, or an alpha with a material painted so that it will just paint the material on a layer with the alpha. I think we would have got a better result if I modeled and baked it down, but you know, for a quick fix, this is going to work. Right, so I layered in some more like leathery kind of bump in here, and now I'm just going to go through and kind of hand paint some sort of stylized weathering to this. I kind of want a mix between shades, so I wanted more of a dark material, like darker colors in the middle where it's a lot newer and there hasn't been a lot of wear and tear, and on the outsides of the leather where things have been cut and, you know, essentially styled, I wanted it to be a lot more white or worn. So I'm kind of painting that in now. I also went and laid over a little bit of like a baked in lighting. Yeah, so here I'm making a filter with my curvature, which is masked out for all the edges, so I don't have to go and hand paint all these. So again, this is trying to be as procedural as possible, so I'm not essentially destroying things. And then here I'm adding an extra layer to just paint a little more extra, the parts that weren't getting it, and adding, you know, this adds a little more texture to my wearing as well. So painting this all by hand can be a little annoying, but you know, there's a lot of good generators inside of Substance Painter that can get you a really good outside wear. But for me personally, I like to paint some of this stuff, especially when I'm making a stylized model, because it gives me a lot more of the accuracy that I'm looking for and the stylized kind of like feel to this dirt and the wear. But obviously the more procedural you can get things, the easier it'll be if you have to change things up later. Darkening some more areas on the top jacket. Alright, so it's obviously very exaggerated, so I'll probably fade this in a little. But at least the detail's there, so we can kind of, you know, go and chisel away and refine the details a little bit more and take things away where we don't want it. But I'm going to do this process for every other piece of articles on the clothing. So everything will kind of get this sort of treatment where I can just pick and choose areas that I want to detail specifically and go through and refine and give a little more of a story and personality to them based on what they've gone through. What did she use this for? What's happening here? So just adjusting the base color to give it a little more of a blue color. So here's another way that we can be more procedural, is just layering in with a fill layer of black and using a grunge material as a mask. So now I can mask this in. And here was where I was talking about where I was baking in light. Yeah, so here's where I'm baking in the lighting a little bit. So I'm going to make it like a bit lighter from the top down. So this will kind of simulate like kind of like a sun bleaching to the leather. It's going to be super subtle, but something that I just feel like adds a little more something. So you can see that I've toned down all that stuff that I hand painted, so it's still there, but it's just toned down. I added in a black grunge over top of everything, so I can just keep layering more things in, trying to be as procedural as possible until something sticks and something just feels really good. Sometimes I go through hundreds of iterations of different kinds of grunge to detail something up. So I'm just going to make the dirt here a little less obvious, maybe a little more whitish blue. Right, so the next thing I'm going to detail up a little bit is the skates. So how I detailed this was kind of in different layers. So I brought in different kinds of grunge filters that were already in Substance Painter. And I kind of layered them in with just different colors of RGB. So I put one red, one blue, and one green, and just kind of adjusted them as I see them because I wanted to layer them in based on like different types of dirt. So one was going to be, so the green, for example, is like a more heavier dirt that's going to be like what collects on the wheels. It's more of like a mud per se, something that's just going to sit at the base of everything. And then one is going to be like an overall dust, which I think is what my blue is. And the red is also kind of just like a cavity, like it's filling all the cavities with something. So this is all layered in super, super lightly, but the reason why I put them at different colors is so I can notice what I'm doing while I'm working. All right, so one thing I wanted to talk about quickly was just loading in the textures once you're finished. So I'm bringing them all in as PBRs, and I'm just going to load them into the base color and test them out. So you just double click and load the proper texture into the corresponding spot. You'll notice it's coming in upside down, and that's just because my UVs were upside down at this time. I did end up fixing those at some point, but you can just click Affect All Channels and flip the V setting if that's the same issue for you. You don't have to do it in the software, you can fix it externally, and that's okay. But this is basically the general workflow of just importing in your textures on your material in Character Creator after you have exported. So during this phase, I just do this so I can test it out. Then I'll import my current progress and keep testing my textures as I'm going. So here you can see I'm going up to the Substance Painter tab and I'm hitting Export Character, and I'm just going to put this anywhere on the drive that I feel. And this is just going to export my character out and into a really good setup for putting it in Substance Painter. So what I can do now is open Substance Painter, File, import, and import my mesh that I just exported from Character Creator in the proper setups. So doing this is sending out all the mesh and all the textures that are inside Character Creator right now. So I'm going to set my document resolution to 4K, so everything comes in 4K. I'm going to make sure that my PBR metal roughness is set. To also say that alpha test, because I wanted to have just transparency. So here I'm also going to select all of the folders here and import all my textures in. So I make sure that when I'm starting my scene, all my textures are coming in from Character Creator, which is exactly what I want, because I want to alter the skin textures that were there already, so this will save me time from having to project my own. I'm going to make sure that Use UV Tile workflow is turned on. So a cool part about this is that when you're exporting everything from Character Creator, you can export it in the pose it's in, or you can export it in A pose or T pose or whatever pose you want a texture in. So I exported in this pose just to show the versatility of this, but if I was texturing the full complete body, I would probably export this in A pose or T pose. Since the textures I needed to adjust were only like a general skin color to be more tan, as well as a bit more rosiness to the face, and it was more like subtle skin textures I needed to change. So I went about it this way. So I'm going into the UV tiles for the skin, and I'm just adding a fill layer and dragging in my textures that correspond to this fill layer per tile. So what's my base color, roughness, and normal, and then I'm basically telling that layer to fill on the certain tile that those textures correspond to. So this is how you're supposed to import all of your textures from Character Creator and layer them in tile by tile. So this is a really cool workflow. If I could have textured the clothes and the skin all in one scene, this would make it super useful. So for regular game characters, this would have been great, but because of my mass amount of texture sets, I was afraid it would be far too many textures for Substance Painter, especially at 4K, because I wanted maximum resolution. Alright, so now that all the textures are in, I'm just laying over like a multiply of a tan color. So I'm adding a little bit more tanness to the skin because it was far too pale for me, for my character. So being able to save all the skin color detail for my character was really nice, to be able to utilize the default skin texture in the library for the content library in Character Creator. So this saved me a lot of time. So I'm doing the exact same thing to bring in the eye textures, so at least I can see the eye textures and the eyelashes. And then the last thing I'm going to adjust is just painting a little bit more redness to the cheeks and stuff. I think you can do this in the, like by adding makeup in the content library tools, but I felt like I wanted to hand paint this because it was so specific in my concept. So I'm just going over with a light, dry brush, and I'm just painting and layering in a little bit more rosiness to the face. And then I'll just layer it in a little bit more. So this would be the general workflow if you were working with a few less texture sets than me, but for this character I had a lot, so I thought that I would do it both ways so that I could show you the UV tile workflow and also just the general texture set workflow depending on what you want to do. Or you can be like me and split it apart and work in two separate scenes. So now I can export the textures using the character creator preset, and this will export all the AO and everything you'll need to plug this into character creator seamlessly. So I'm just going to turn everything off except for the skin head, which is stuff that I adjusted, and I'll export it into the same folder so everything's organized and neatly exported. So when you import it, you can just grab that folder that exported and it's going to just put it all back in itself for you. So it's super convenient because you don't have to go through the whole double click and import your texture phase. This will just do it for you. So the next thing that I am doing here is I'm just going to adjust the eyes. I didn't want to, like, basically this is the best way. I didn't want to paint it in Substance Painter because I felt like it was just so specific that I wanted to adjust the texture that was already there, but make it a little bit more stylized. I really liked the iris and the details that we had, but I wanted it to be a bit more exaggerated and poppy and stylized and something closer to our character. So I layered in a little bit more of a teal and multiplied this on top with a soft light, adjusted the hue and saturation of the original iris, and this just gave me a nice bright popped out iris color. And then here I'm doing like a soft blur for like a little stylized ring around the eye. And then for the rest of the eye, I'm just layering in like a bit more white because I don't want so much of a humanoid like veining to the eye. It just feels a bit too human for me. I wanted something of a mix. And when you bring it into Character Creator afterwards, you'll have to just import onto the cornea and also the eye material so that it comes through for both. It's very important to apply it to both or it won't come through. Alright, so now I'm just testing the face features, poses and stuff like that to just make sure that everything's still working. Alright, so now once I have like the final textures in here, you can see like this is the end of my texturing. I still have probably a little more things to do, but here's our final textures.